Welcome back to another episode of OST, where we revisit hands from Poker Out Loud. This week is episode 2 of the student season, where we will be looking at a hand that you played against Chris Price. 3-bet cold call pot.
Can you believe you're still here?
What do you mean?
You know, in this role, hosting.
How do you expect me to respond to that? Yes.
I wasn't sure, man. I was going to leave it up to the YouTube comments.
Hey, man, YouTube is with me.
I agree.
YouTube is on my side.
You're in the seat, aren't you?
I got the magic.
I had replacements lined up.
You fucking so didn't.
I 100% did. I had like 4 other options.
All right. Let's move on. I value my hosting ability.
You obviously did a great job. That was a backhanded compliment in some sort of way.
All right, here we go. Let's
dive in.
Let's get into this.
Sure.
So I open the button with Queen 8 of diamonds.
The disrespect.
I know.
Sure.
I don't give a fuck.
Right.
As you'll see on the tape.
Pretty clear open here. Probably going to open somewhere around 40%. Usually I would open more, but given that I have a tough opponent in the small blind.
Okay, I have a clear continue here with my hand. Finally, I get the VPIP. I like to 3-bet this hand more than call, I believe. I actually would start constructing my flat call range as far as offsuit Broadways go with the weaker ones. So I think I'd be more inclined to call like King 10, Jack 10, Queen 10, Queen Jack, King Jack. Hands of that class, I suppose. Ace 10 stands to dominate a lot of Chris's opening range here. And we're just going to be pushing a fair amount of equity, even the times that he defends. It also shifts very naturally into a 5-bet bluff, should he be choosing to 4-bet, and I think he's getting on a line. So I'm going to choose a size here, a little bit more in the polar nature since I am out of position. I'm going to go to 175.
You decide to 3-bet me with Ace 10.
The disrespect.
I know. Just disrespect all around.
Sure.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the types of hand classes you think you're going to be 3-betting facing my button open.
Yeah, so I think this is a pretty aggressive formation, and I think it's reasonable to have a bit wider of a 3-bet range here than normal. I don't think you're getting out of line by any stretch, so I'm not really attacking like a 60% opening range here.
To me, the cons of 3-betting this type of hand, and we've talked about this before on the previous episode, are pretty blatant.
That you think I fold out dominated hands?
That and just like post flop is really hard once you 3-bet.
I kind of disagree with both. So I think for this size, yes, I'll fold out some of your offsuit 10x. So like 10-9, Jack 10, Queen 10, King 10 might fold.
Right.
But you can't fold your suited aces, I don't think, at this size.
Would you say the merit to 3-betting Ace 10 offsuit is largely just the EV it generates pre-flop?
Yeah, I think that's the best starting point with it. But also I think it performs very poorly without initiative. So I don't think folding is any option here.
What about when you just make pairs, you know? You
don't really pairs are nice. That doesn't happen all that often.
A good amount of the time.
Sure. You know? Also, it's just like I would rather just have like suited ace highs. They're just going to perform a lot better. I'm thinking in terms of like post flop, what line work I would be trying to construct out of the small blind. And the issue with calling is calling ranges out of the small blind seem inherently obvious. So the c-bet doesn't come through at the same frequency because so the button range is pretty wide.
Right.
The small blind flat range is insanely tight.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mesh very well at all.
I mean, I think it makes sense.
It makes intuitive sense, but like what ultimately people have done, generally speaking, it's not going to be me because I'm going to play more hands from the small blind than most. But the general simplification there is don't call. Just 3-bet or fold.
Sure.
Because
if you are going to call, what hands do you call?
So I think it's going to be hands that are going to perform better either through some, I guess like some leading on opportunistic flops, or hands that will give me the capacity to bluff catch cleanly and or check raise.
What types of hands?
So hands that are going to contain two of the three major properties of a hand. It's either going to be suited and connected, suited and have high card value, or I mean, I guess that's it. You're not really going to have high card value and connectedness. I guess like
ace 10, for example.
No, that's just a showdown value hand. It's not connected. It's not suited.
I mean, it can make straights.
Okay, but we're not gonna start calling ace 10 suit
right,
or
fine,
connected.
Fine. So,
but like king queen off, I think is a fine flat. I would prefer to have king queen off flatting for sure.
You don't think that they perform pretty similarly?
I don't even think it's remotely close. I think ace 10 high is the best hand post flop a lot unimproved on board textures where it can't really navigate the bluff catching tree very well.
Right.
Where king queen high isn't necessarily.
All right, let's just agree to disagree. You 3-bet ace 10 offsuit. Don't like those types of hands. I'd rather just have like ace 10 suited.
See, I think ace 10 suited fits better as a call.
That hand just like polarizes easier, though.
You don't have to polarize.
You're
against a very, very, very wide range.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Let's move past the 3-bet.
Well, here's the thing. If we can pick something apart, I think it should be my sizing. I think I'd probably go a little too large.
So you go 175, a more polar size.
Yeah. And I will say, admittedly, it's probably because I'm calling from the small blind more aggressively, if you will.
In my analysis, I say that you're calling sometimes. Is that not
I
true?
think I'm calling a lot, actually. And that's why I chose the large size.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there was a little bit of pushback where it's like, you're probably not going to do that with aces and kings. And that's probably true. It's more so to like protect like jacks and tens. Yeah. But again, I think I'm complicating all of this. I think a better size here, you opened to 30, right?
30
I'm
or
pretty
35.
sure 30, 35. I think a better sizing here is 125 instead of 175.
Just 4x.
Yeah, 4x, 4.5x, even 135 is fine. I think I just like got a little bit too much into the meta of like this young kid's gonna want to fight.
Well, I probably would punt a little bit more facing 175 than 125.
Fair.
I don't think I would just disciplined.
But it self-corrects too, because you're also just start folding queen 8 of diamonds.
Right.
Where it's like, if you're calling 175 with queen 8 of diamonds, the sizing's great.
Right.
Because now you're continuing too widely through both trees.
So Price is in the big blind with king queen offsuit.
Yeah.
And he's faced with a decision.
So Chris opens to 30. Matt 3-bets to 175. His bet is pulled. I think he's likely doing this with a lot of his suited wheel aces and a lot of the top end of his range. I have blockers for the top end, so I think this is typically would be a decent candidate to call. I can't really see 4-betting here. I believe Chris is relatively wide. If I flat here, I think that Chris is likely either going to come along with a wider part of his range, which I think I have a good chunk of dominated. It almost seems like this is just a little too good of an opportunity to pass up to play in position against Matt as well. I'm going to opt to call.
Lands on a cold call. Thoughts on a cold call versus a 4-bet?
We talked about this in episode 1. This is dicey territory because it's really difficult to ever advocate for cold calling 3-bets. But I also think that's largely just because nobody's put in any sort of work to
Price's argument is his positional edge. He would like to maintain his positional edge. That's my understanding of what he says, at least.
I think that's fair.
Do you think there's merit to that?
A little bit. I think that this cold call performs okay when stacks are very deep and when stacks are relatively shallow. So when I say relatively shallow, I don't mean 50 blinds because I think he's just better served to shove. But like at like the exact 100 big blind depth,
You want to cold call at 100 big blinds?
I think it works a lot better because the reality is that you're just trying to over-realize this equity, and just jamming here performs pretty poorly. 4-bet folding also performs pretty poorly. 4-bet calling off performs pretty poorly.
So you think you can over-realize at 100 big blinds?
Yeah, because when you make any equity post, you're just all in. You're never folding the hand improved.
Yeah, sure, you're all in, but you often don't have the initiative.
I understand.
Which would
well,
hinder the
the other
realization.
assumption is that you'll be checked to at a fair frequency because bluffing will be difficult at low SPRs.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm again, I don't think that cold calling in such an aggressive formation is good.
Yeah.
I think that re-aggressing in an aggressive formation is significantly better. I think this is a premier 4-bet candidate for Chris. I don't think he'll have better 4-bet bluffs.
Would you be taking all of your king jack, king queen, ace queen, ace jack, and just 4-betting?
I think because of the sides that I chose in the small blind, I would muck king jack off, and I would probably start with like king queens, and I would probably mix like king queen off between 4-betting and folding, and then just probably 4-bet all of my king queen suited.
He does decide on a cold call though, and I somehow find a fold
You should.
with queen 8 of diamonds. I mean, I think it's fine.
Yeah, so I actually...
I'm just surprised that I did it.
That's fair. Well, all right, so full disclosure, I've already analyzed this spot. I'm actually doing a course on the Poker Out Loud season where I'm dissecting each one of your strategies and plucking out some interesting hands and running them through solves. And we've been using simple 3-way for situations like this.
Simple, I don't understand. Simple 3-way
It's a solver, yeah.
Oh.
So it
Not
analyzes...
Munker?
No, it's by the simple product. So simple post flop, simple pre flop, simple 3-way. So believe it or not, through the simple pre flop solves, they actually do account for cold calls. The issue is that
Really?
yeah, but it's so narrow. Like it wants
What
to
is
cold
the
call
solver cold calling?
exactly king queen suited, queens and jacks. And I'm drawing from memory, so like I'm not even positive that it's that, but I remember it's like a 2% cold call range.
Yeah.
So it's negligible. It might actually solve out to being 0, but like, you know, to the point that we're able to iterate it like 95% accuracy. It's like this tiny little segment of like 2% of hands that it's willing to cold call, and they're also a part of the 4-bet range. So it's not even doing them at 100%.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, you know, we were able to see like what this sort of looks like at baseline. And I had to extrapolate out and start to give what I thought his cold call range actually is, which is far wider. I think he's cold calling like 8% of hands. And he's just under aggressing. So I guess the whole point that I'm trying to make is that errors are going to occur here. That's a given. But I think these errors are replicated in real world environments. Like we see this type of shit happen all the time. Right. And it's generally born out of risk aversion.
At the very least, it's very relevant to the people watching, right? Because this stuff happens way more than it should.
Right.
And it does in this particular scenario.
Right. So I basically had to flesh out like what I think his cold calling range is. And by my best guess, because he had king queen, which I think is a good 4-bet candidate, Chris is devoid of bluffs in his 4-betting strategy. So I think that like his 4-bet strategy probably looks like in this particular situation where it's a hyper aggressive formation.
Right.
He's probably willing to stack off with like queens plus, ace king for sure, and then maybe some ace queen and jacks. Don't know, right?
Well, all of his arguments that he uses for king queen still apply to all those other hands.
Yeah, but they're king queen. The real argument that's not being stated is he's risk averse. He doesn't want to fold.
Isn't he your student?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that people aren't inherent to their own.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not my student. He's a student of Solve For Why, just like everybody else.
Right.
But like, you know, if Fausto was in this spot, he might be cold calling too. And the same thing. It's because he's generally risk averse, but for
another
way
cold
different
call hand we have here.
Right. But the thing is like it's for a totally different reason. Chris Price is risk averse because he's inherently risk averse. Fausto's risk averse because he's super laggy for the early portions of the game tree, right? And when you're super aggressive in those early portions of the game tree, you ultimately funnel people to having stronger hands. So
you just say Fausto's risk averse?
Yeah.
You think he just passed like my understanding of risk aversion is just like passing on unnecessary volatility.
Well, I think unnecessary is an unfair qualifier.
Avoidable volatility, just passing on volatility in general.
Okay, passing on volatility in general is a part of it for sure, but it's also like passing on volatility to a point where you're better served to take volatility.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that I think that like somebody like Fausto, who appears to be super loose aggressive, has conditioned himself and or his environment to recognize that once aggressive action starts to take place, they tend to have it. And it programs him then into risk aversion
That makes
for
sense.
the 4-bet strategies, for the river bluffing strategies.
Right.
And I demonstrate that all of this.
Conditioned by the pool.
Or really by himself. Right? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point.
Right. Well, let's we got a lot to unpack here. I think we should move past pre-flop.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I fold the queen eight of diamonds.
Right.
And we see a flop of king 4-4 rainbow.
Okay, so the cold call by Chris here is, I wouldn't go so far as to say peculiar. I would just say more so that it's complicated. So if he's 4-betting, which is very reasonable, he'll be constructed in a very polar manner. It's difficult to work in a linear 4-bet here. What I mean by that is to take your middling equity hands like king, queen, pocket nines, pocket eights, something to that nature, and begin cold foring. Now, that's not to say that's not profitable. Of course it is. It's certainly making money versus a button open and a small blind 3-bet. So he's kind of creating a situation where he's delaying the resistance point of the hand. So rather than basically making all the difficult decisions pre-flop, he's allowing himself the ability to utilize a positional edge should Chris fold, which is what happened, to kind of complicate the hand for me now moving forward post. I don't mind working this in sometimes. Obviously, he is a student, so I kind of have an idea how he's going to begin constructing. I think that I think he probably has less coverage on the king than would be necessarily perceived. As far as 4-bet bluffs go, king, queen, and like hands like king, jack are kind of the nuts for that. So I do expect him to have hands like jacks, nines, eights, sevens, and then perhaps like some ace X that I dominate and some ace X that dominates me. So like some ace jack, ace queen, but also like some ace 7 through ace 9 suited type holdings. I don't think I get a c-bet through here, and my hand isn't going to barrel very well, but it is like the bottom of my bluff catching range, so I think I can very comfortably start off with a check. I do have kings full in my range. He's less likely to. So this flop should go check, check a lot, and we should be able to then play future streets accordingly.
You eventually land on a check. Do you stand by your check?
No, I think that at the time, I probably misframed what Chris's cold calling range looked like, thinking that actually I probably framed it correctly, and checking probably is the right play, but it needs to result in a check fold. And what would have made me more confident is just betting once, and when he continues, recognize that like the only thing that's coming along is showdown value.
My thoughts are it's pretty hard for a cold call range to find bluffs.
I think you're right.
On king 4-4.
I think you're right. I think in my head, if he's cold calling king X type hands,
right,
then he's also cold calling like jack 10 suited and
Sure.
10-9 suited and stuff like that.
Sure.
So I'm kind of like convincing myself or switching gears to lock in on what hands do I beat.
In hindsight, do you think that ace 10 serves you better just as a bluff here?
In pecking order, it serves me best as a check fold, then next as a bluff, and finally as
Last
a bluff catcher.
As a bluff catcher,
Yeah.
I see. But Price does decide to bet.
Okay, so Matt checks. I think that this is kind of the plan that we started with was positional advantage with our call. Makes it really tough for Chris to call pre with a 3-bet and a cold call range. We flop, of course, I think what is pretty obviously the best hand in the spot. I'm seeing Matt show up here with a lot of his 3-bets probably being connectors of some sort on the high to mid end, as well as some pairs, 7s, 8s, things like that. I'm going to go ahead and lead out on this. I'm going to bet 200.
I don't like his size.
He 200 into
Half pot.
Half pot, yeah.
I was surprised to see that this was actually the preferred size for this spot. Given how
you mean preferred size, what, by the solver?
by the solver, yeah. Even with the range that I had programmed in.
That you gave to Price.
Yeah.
What kind of range did you give the solver?
I gave him like 9s plus, suited broadways plus, and then ace queen.
So an uncapped cold call.
Kind of. Sorry, it was bounded. He didn't have aces or kings. I
Okay.
think I gave him like 15% of aces and kings, and then like half of queens.
Okay.
Seems
reasonable.
Yeah, it was relatively bounded. But same thing with ace king. I gave him a small portion of it, like 25%. Yeah, I was surprised to see that this was the preferred sizing. I wasn't surprised to see that the preferred action was check.
It's probably not. Yeah, I was just gonna say it's probably not betting that much for denial. I would
No,
think.
king queen itself did like to bet for this size, but the overall strategy was largely
Just
a check
check.
back. Yeah, which I agree with in the sense
Makes
that
sense.
we'll dig into this a little bit further as we get through the streets.
Mhm.
But his hand is at most a 2-street hand, unimproved.
Agreed.
So like starting off with a bet against, I guess a polar range
Yeah,
from my small blind action.
sort of.
Well, by the time I call half pot, I make mistakes here.
Yeah. Well,
But
range
assuming
is,
I'm not making errors, it gets pretty polar.
I mean, ranges naturally funnel pretty quickly on King 4-4 anyway.
Yeah. Also,
Right.
it's kind of a 4-bet pot, even
Yeah.
though it's a cold call pot.
Right.
Right.
I was thinking how the equity is distributed right here, facing like I don't even know who has range advantage.
And that's where I struggled, I think, in game, and why I led to making an error.
Right.
I think in my head, I
Like-
know that ace queen is a good bluff catcher.
Does Chris have it? This is a cool concept to me. Like
Yeah.
it's a static texture, yet the player who took the passive action, I would think, has equity advantage.
It would be very, very close.
Yeah.
Especially depending on the width of my 3-bet range.
Which is like defies the principles.
It does a little
Right.
bit, but it's also why cold calling is such a cool concept that really does have some merit anytime you're playing against opponents who either are unstudied in that area or are prone to making errors. So specifically against somebody like me, I'm prone to making calling errors, right? And that could potentially be a good pathway to minimize your risk pre-flop, where I'll just respond pretty well to a 4-bet, assumedly. Or force me into a post-flop scenario where it's like now you kind of get overpaid whenever you do realize your equity.
Okay.
The thing that I think he overlooked, though, is that like you're going to have a lot of continues in pre-flop, which could make his whole positional edge kind of dilute a lot.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Right? Because now if this is like a 3-way effective 4-bet pot that only cost us 3 bets pre, those ranges are weirdly skewed. He has a 4-bet range in his cold call that's bounded, right? At the top. Like he has a capped 4-bet range,
yeah.
which is really weird.
That's
like
totally
not a
backwards.
thing. Yeah, that's like
Again,
not a
this
thing.
hand just defies the principles.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Like a capped
Yeah.
4-bet range that's still really fucking strong. And then you have like
So condensed, we'd call it.
I
sort of.
guess. And then you have like a polar 3-bet range
Yeah.
that doesn't get to shake the bottom because it didn't face any other action.
Shit's getting pretty
And
whack.
then like a really wide opening range.
Yeah.
That just like is getting laid a pretty good price.
Yeah. But turns out Price is the solver,
Sure.
and he finds the $200 bet.
Yep.
Should we get into that a little more?
Yeah. Well,
It's really just mirroring, as far as the solver decision.
Mhm.
My understanding is it's just mirroring the frequency.
yes.
And it's not betting as much for denial as we feel like we should.
Right. Yeah, it's checking back queens at a pretty high frequency.
Right.
It's not really bluffing with like too much of the 9-10 suited, maybe a couple of the backdoor candidates.
So you stick to the plan. You were going to bluff catch.
Yep.
He bet he could be bluffing, and you explain some more why you're bluff catching.
All right, so Chris is going to choose a size of 200 into 380. This is a little bit on the larger side. It's honestly fine for what's effectively a 4-bet pot, but he doesn't really have 3-street hands here very often. Of course, he could be trapping with aces, kings, sometimes ace-king, but we block the aces and the ace-king. King's full isn't really incentivized to go big. He does, of course, want to start protecting hands like queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s if they're in his range. But I think he can do so for a smaller size since I also have similar hands in my range. Again, he very well could have king, queen, but I don't really think that that serves him as a 3-street hand. Particularly when I do have the viability here to both check raise and just be sticky through multiple streets. So I'm actually going to continue through a call. Dependent upon the turn texture, I may bluff catch twice. I don't really think I'm going to be in a situation to turn this hand into a bluff. I don't really think he has a lot of bluffing candidates outside of like exactly queen jack, and maybe he has hands like jack 10 of diamonds. I think I have the 10 of clubs, so jack 10 of diamonds, jack 10 of, no, I have the 10 of spades. So he could have jack 10 of diamonds, jack 10 of clubs. He could have queen 10 of diamonds, queen 10 of clubs, queen jack in all 3 suits. And then he might also just even bet the queen jack of hearts here to try to stab and win. I have a very clear call, I think, as the bulk of my range would want to choose. And then dependent upon turns, I may continue through another call.
So we're off to the turn. 3 of clubs, no help to our ace 10. And now that Chris has the lead and we're in bluff catch mode, we check. No explanation there. And Chris decides to bet again.
Okay, so Matt's call, he's in realization, I believe, so he's still trying to, he has some equity in this hand, and he's obviously, we're moving towards showdown. I have a couple options here. I think that in retrospect, I probably bet a little bit big with my particular holding on this flop. I do want to continue because I think that I'm able to capitalize on my equity that I have here. I think that the possibility he's tripped up on this type of board, and if he has any like that, it's. I believe he thinks that he's maybe has some hands that are blocking some of my holdings in this particular holding. I've taken kind of a weird line with Queen King, but I think that another bet on this turn is likely going to either see, I think it will see either, I think they'll see a fold, to be honest. And I want to keep ranges relatively wide because I'd like to get a little more value. So I'm going to bet a little bit smaller sizing, but I'm still going to bet with the intent of getting another street after this. So we're going to bet 325.
So Price chooses 325. So he goes half pot, under half pot.
Yeah.
Thoughts on the size?
I think this is where he's realizing he doesn't have a 3-street candidate.
Hedging.
Yes. So again, off of a bet on the flop, this street is now heavily preferred to check. And the real reason behind all of this, so the overall scope of Chris's construction here is one in such that each bet is going to narrow my effective range. And if I'm protected at all in my checks, he's going to run into a spot where he lands on the river and my worst hands are going to be like ace king and king queen itself, right? So what ultimately happens is he chooses the right size and the right decision with his exact holding. King queen does prefer a bet on the flop and it prefers it for half pot. Totally fine. Once you do that though, Now what you have to recognize is that the hands that you're allowing to carry through to the turn are ones that can only bluff catch one more time. So once he bets again on the turn, if he chooses what the preferred sizing would be, which was going to be like somewhere between, I think, 50 and 75% pot, maybe something to that nature.
Right.
Now all of a sudden, I'm in a difficult spot to start bluff catching my queens, jacks, tens, 9 type of hands.
Right.
They have to start falling off.
I think your range is pretty easy to play.
Yeah.
Facing bet.
Right. Right.
Like no mistakes are really. You're not really cornered into any mistakes when king queen takes that.
Right.
sort
And the
of
other
line.
thing to consider is when he's check raised now on this turn, he's destroyed.
Yeah.
He has his only hand that can bet call, really, because he doesn't really have much stronger in range.
Sure.
Ace 4 suited doesn't cold call pre. He might have a little bit of ace king that he'll naturally be able to continue with.
The other
this
day,
is the
I
next pick
4-bet
down.
ace deuce of clubs,
Mhm.
and it just comes deuce 5.
That's nice. It's a nice world you live in.
What a life.
Yeah, I'm sure you were against kings.
Yeah. Close enough.
Sure.
Aces, obviously.
Oh, right. Aces versus...
They couldn't have it, though, I thought, because I had an ace. Anyway.
So,
Anyway.
speaking...
It can happen.
Just speaking to the last point of Chris's scenario, he has to recognize that he needs to play this hand in such a way where my bluff catchers can call twice. And so that's why he sizes down here on the turn, which is an okay hedge, but it's not a great one.
Yeah, it's interesting how we work like that. We recognize that doesn't feel too good either way, so we hedge.
Right.
It's
And then
interesting.
conversely, from my vantage point, I make a huge error. If you cut to my explanation here, I think you'll understand what I do wrong.
Yeah, let's see what you have to say.
All right, I really like this sizing by Chris. He doesn't really have a plethora of bluffs available. So I was gonna have a real decision if he had chosen to bet like pot. And that decision basically would be how imbalanced is he? Would he be betting pot with his value hands trying to rep that he's bluffing at too high of a frequency? Or would he only be betting pot with his actual bluffs? I think I would have just arrived that he would have been trying to level me, and ultimately I would have folded. When he chooses the size of 325, which is a little under half pot, it allows him to be betting more hands. He could technically still be betting a hand like queens or jacks, though I think it's largely a mistake, at least without the queen of clubs in hand. Reducing my king queen of club combinations is probably pretty critical. This is close. I do have the ace of clubs, which means that he has no nut flush draws here. His logical bluffs are going to be queen 10 of clubs, queen jack of clubs, jack 10 of clubs, 10 9 of clubs, and so on, depending on how wide he's cold calling with suited connectors. So we're looking at something in the range of 4 to 8 logical bluffs. His value hands are going to be, let's give him half the combos of aces, so 1.5. Same thing with kings for 3 total combos. We'll say like half the ace king, so maybe let's give him like 5 or 6 combos of ace king for 9. And then he could be making some accidental value bets with like ace jack clubs. No, I have the ace of clubs, sorry. I guess with just like ace jack high, ace queen high. But I'm not really sure what he would be targeting at that point. He also could be making some thin value bets with like queens or jacks. So we'll give him like half combos of each of those for another 6 combos. So we're looking at something in the neighborhood of like 15 combinations of value versus 4 to 8 combos of bluffs. So he's at like a 3 to 1 or 2 to 1 value to bluff combo. And I'm getting laid pretty much the exact right price for this. I think I'm gonna have to continue one more. And I may ultimately have to call on a non-club, non-queen, non-jack river.
So I lean very heavily on the fact that I have the ace of clubs as a potential kind of like out here.
You are now looking for a way to
A
dig
bluff-opportunity,
out. Yeah.
if you will. Yeah.
A bluff opportunity.
Right. And that's very misguided and a misunderstanding of what the ace of clubs should mean to me. What it means to me is that Chris isn't bluffing because he didn't turn the backdoor nut draw to continue with, right?
Yeah, we're really scrambling for hands here, right?
Yeah.
Jack 10 of clubs.
Yeah, so it's like I landed on the turn with a hand that I should have folded the flop with, and now I have all the reason in the world, but he's laying me an even better price than I expected.
Now you're like, all right, how are we gonna win?
Right, so it's like, how can I fuck with this guy?
Yeah. He bet 325. How am I gonna win this fucking hand?
Right. This is a primary example of where creative types fail in the no limit environment. When ranges get very, very narrow and you have a desperation hope to take a pot away. So yeah, I have a very clear fold here on the turn. My reasonings are very misguided and simply due to price, I think. He just lays me a really good price to continue with my worst bluff catcher. And I'm trying to find a way that I could potentially win on certain rivers.
Right. So you bluff catch again, and we land on the Jack of Diamonds back on you.
So now I just have a very clear check fold. Anything he was bluffing with just got there, as I kind of explained. I don't expect bets to come through on this card because this is a card that still helps my range. I'll have some king jack that took this line. I'll have some jacks that took this line. Queens can't really call a bet any longer.
Ace Jack of clubs, potentially.
Not
that that's that relevant anyway.
Yeah, that's probably a worse bluff catcher than queens, to be honest. Because at least if I have queens, then he could have ace 10 of clubs or
Jack 10 of clubs.
Jack 10 of clubs, yeah.
Right.
Hands like that. But both, I think, ultimately fall off as check folds. I'm pretty sure I'm now to a position where I can only call with my king X or better.
Do you think Price really has any one and done type hands like on the flop? I know we don't say that anymore, but hands that just bet once. I don't see those.
but I think that they're just protective bets. I think they're tens.
Yeah,
nines.
I think ace 10 just loses to those anyway, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So you check to Chris on the river, and he lands on a bet. Let's hear his reasoning.
Okay, so Matt called my turn bet. I did size it a little bit under half, and definitely hoping for the value call there. I'm starting to think that if he's near the top of his range, he's going to be, I may be in the very unlikely spot dominated here, but it's just so rare that happens. I'm definitely leaning towards a bet here rather than checking back. The jacks definitely just like smash me, and I think that it's definitely something that I could rep, especially in the spot. I'm gonna bet out. I'm going to choose a bit larger sizing. Now that I'm thinking through this, I'm thinking around what spots is he check calling all the way through to river, and am I going to get value? Does he have queens, or is he near the top of his range here where he's just check calling begrudgingly with bigger holdings like tens, queens? We're gonna put out another bet, and we're gonna go. We're just gonna go 1,000 even.
1,000. The disrespect continues.
Sure.
Over to you. Thoughts on the size?
This is egregious. He can't get called by worse.
Egregious.
I just.
What is his target?
Mistakes. My propensity to not believe,
Yeah.
to call too often. And to be fair, that's made him a lot of money throughout the course of this hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, it's tough. If he had followed the logic of the line he should take, he would check back turn, and then he'd be betting 400 on this river, and I would still just be folding.
Yeah.
So he would have cost himself money from an exploitative sense.
Right.
But you know, I play this hand very, very, very badly. And
What
to rely on that is difficult.
Do you think that's just misappropriating your like range bucket where you are in your range?
Yes, I also think it's trying to determine on the fly how much somebody's going to fight through a cold call pre.
The nature of poker out loud.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it.
Really is. Yeah, knowing what I know of Chris now that I've dissected him a little bit further, I think he has no bluffs on flop and certainly none by river.
Yeah. Seems hard to find. Not very available.
Yeah, I think like my hands like queens and jacks. I probably don't even land on this river with jacks because I think they should just fold turn.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sticky. I probably don't fold turn.
Well, lesson learned. If you were playing against Berkey, bet the flop.
Bet a lot against me. I will call a lot. Yeah. If I have an obvious weakness, it's being a non-believer.
Folding sucks, man.
It does, man. It's
How are you gonna
so
win
brutal.
if you fold?
That's true. And like, you know, this guy cold calling pre, it's just like, that's shit.
Yeah.
That is shit.
Fuck your cold call.
Right. But it's like king queen always.
Yeah.
Even like when we ran the solve, the first hand that pops out is just like king queen.
Yeah.
It's just like, yeah, of course, that's the target hand.
That's gonna wrap it up for episode 2 of On Second Thought. I hope you enjoyed this week's hand. I certainly did. Definitely a disruptive hand.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of our whole vibe, isn't it?
It calms down a little bit.
All right. Well, that's it.
Stay tuned to see if Chris makes it back for next week.